It's in the human imagination that dreams are made, but it's in the hands of the talented and visionary breeders that these dreams become reality. Like the great artists with paints and canvas, master breeders use flesh and genes to create fascinating and outstanding animals. Come with us to share a look into the metamorphosis of the Clarion Collie breeding program as we present Reminiscing, the Clarion Chronicles. Here now are our program hosts, John Buddy and Judy Evans.
Hard to believe 48 years have passed and we're still speaking to each other. This is my guest, Judy Evans, my closest friend for the last 48 years. We've traveled a lot of roads together, seen a lot of dogs together, done a lot of things together, but most of all, we talked about it all the time. So today we're going to take a look back at Judy's position in the collie world and how our very early paths crossed and how it sort of commandeered a future for both of us. So Judy, tell me, why collies?
I've always been fascinated by collies. I grew up reading Albert Payson Terhune's books under the covers in my bed with a flashlight, and along with the stories of Walter Farley and the Black Stallion. That was my dream when I was a child, that I was going to have collies and horses, and that's how it all began.
And how did our paths cross back in 1968?
Oh my God, that's a long time ago, you know. I went to the Collie Club of Northern New Jersey match, and I remember Lisa was a baby. She was about 2 years old. Yeah, my daughter Lisa. And we were spread out on a blanket. You probably remember that because you always talk about my tight yellow sweater and my plastic earrings, yellow plastic earrings. And there he was, this little skinny kid, and somehow we just hit it off. I don't know what it was. We started talking, and
at the time you were waiting for a new dog that was coming to you because you had just moved east from California.
That's right. I think they threw me out of California. I kind of didn't fit there. I moved there with a Hertzville bitch, and though I thought the California dogs were pretty, I had a different picture in my mind, and I always loved the East Coast dogs. And I got very excited about Glenn Knowles' Knightswood Sky, and I sent my Hertzville bitch back to breed to Knightswood Sky. And at that time, I met a really wonderful woman who took me under her wing. Her name was Dolores Hogan. She became later Dolores Hogan Gill.
What was her kennel name?
Kemrick.
Right.
And she was the one who bought Valley View's Whirlaway. And I met him because I saved the dog's life. He jumped out of an X-pen at a puppy match, and I grabbed him and saved him from running into the street. And we became fast friends, and I realized that she was on the same wavelength. She had the same view of the collie that I was beginning to form myself, and she became my mentor.
But Whirlaway himself, with both of you on the West Coast, Whirlaway was actually an East Coast dog from a kennel that didn't have a long time span, but bred some incredible dogs, and that would have been Sally Lake of Valley View.
Right, and she had Champion Valley View Satin Slippers that was best opposite at the National, the first National that I ever went to in California. And I saw dogs there like Breeze Along and Stony Kirk Reflection and Champion Perry's World's Fair and Champion Wincall's Night Hunter. These were all dogs that really impressed me. It made me, made me know that I didn't belong in California for a collie.
What was the first collie book you ever had?
It was my Bible, The Evolution of the Collie. Actually, that's not true. The first collie book that I ever had was The Popular Collie of Margaret Osborne's from England. Mm-hmm. But really, that was just a history of the English dogs, and, you know, it was interesting to know the roots. I mean, I read that thing like a Bible. But then The Evolution of the Collie which I borrowed from Dolores before I bought my own, and now I still have 2 copies, and I give them to people once in a while when I think that they deserve to learn things or they're interested in really learning. I think you grew up with that book too.
I did. And I always remember early on with even the Complete Collie, the orange one from CCA and Evolution, you tend to look at the pictures, and I think with any newcomer in the breed, certain pictures just grab you. And the ones that grab you early on do have an impact on what your mental image is, whether it's good or bad, because sometimes you learn that the dog was a great dog, and sometimes it's like, oh my God, I used to like that. But who were some of the early dogs in photos that, you know, sort of tickled your imagination?
Well, the one that I think really brought into focus my image of the collie was Champion Tocallan Golden Ruler. You know, to me, I realized that to me a collie was going to have to be an elegant picture with a beautiful neck and a flowing coat and a balance of outline and head qualities. He was, you know, and he still remains, you know, the picture of something that I always wish I would find in my backyard. Sometimes they come close, but there's, you know, it's always like my ideal. And then I remember the picture of Champion Scotland's Casanova that Evelyn Schaefer took. That was in, I think it was in Trudy's book. And it was like a picture of a beautiful face on a tricolor, which I think is the hardest thing to get in collies, to find that, you know, that expression on a tri-face.
Well, let's go back to the picnic in North Jersey at the match, and we met and we talked, and then you called me a couple of months later excited about a new bitch that you were getting.
And it was Kemrick's Silver Satin. She was a daughter of Champion Valley View's Whirlaway, though he wasn't a champion at that time. And her dam was a daughter of Champion Branwyn the Gray Ghost. And the Gray Ghost's litter sister was the dam of Glen Knowles Knightswood Sky. So it was really a pretty tight breeding. And the bitch was, I had fallen in love with this bitch when the litter was born, and Dolores had no intention of selling her. I remember we went to the San Diego specialty, and Les Canavan was judging. She was a handler. At that time, handlers could judge at specialties. And she had a huge entry, and Silver Satin, I believe, won the 9 to 12 puppy class. And Sandy Tuttle of Kassan and later Arrow Hill Kennels offered Dolores $800. You know, in the 60s, that was a lot of money to buy the bitch, and she turned it down. And you know, so I never thought that Dolores would ever sell this bitch, but she ended up getting a divorce and having to move and being really, you know, unsettled. So she sold me this bitch because she loved me. And she knew I would do well with her, that she actually thought that, you know, this was something that was going to be great for me.
Having never had a whole lot of showing success or experience, how did you proceed then?
Well, I decided that I spent a lot of time looking at collie cues and looking at books and seeing what judges put up certain dogs, and I got a feel for the judges that I thought might really like this bitch. And then I knew this skinny kid who, did so well handling dogs, and I asked him if he might be able to take her out for me. So Alex Gibbs was judging the Collie Club of Southern Ohio. That was the first show, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The first one that she went to. And
that was the last week in January.
Yeah, it was the last week in January. The Kentucky shows were after that, I think. Anyway, I managed to get Silver Satin from New York to Ohio. She went in the back of a moving van to Maryland, and then Howard Hill, who still has collies today, was a minister there, took her out in the car, and John flew on his student standby card and my unemployment check. He was a cheap handler for me at that time. He got more expensive later. But anyway, there goes this kid and this bitch that nobody's really seen before, and she takes a 5-point major under Alex Gibbs. Of course, I missed all the excitement. but it was hard to believe. And then her next weekend, or 2 weeks later, she went to
Next week was
Kentucky.
Connecticut first, wasn't it?
I'm not sure if it
I
was
think she finished at Kentucky.
Okay, yeah, then the next weekend was Connecticut, and Steve Field was judging, who I didn't know if that was going to be good or bad for me because I wasn't exactly sure of the type that he would like, though later on I found some different things out. I had different experiences, but he overdrew his entry, and they asked Teresa Hamilton to judge the bitches. And we lucked out there. She went winner's bitch in an entry of over 60 bitches with John showing her.
And I think she got best of winners under Steve as well.
No, she didn't.
Okay.
She didn't go best of winners. He put up Scott Moore's Golden
Chopin,
Chopin, who was
and
a really pretty dog.
In those days, too, best of winners was a separate class. After they finished the judging of the dogs and the bitches, before the specials came in, they would bring in the winner's dog and the winner's bitch, and whoever got best of winners was the only one to compete for specials, and that changed a couple of years later.
Right.
So 2 weeks after Connecticut,
We go to Kentucky. John goes to Kentucky. I missed all these shows. You know, I got a phone call, but that was all right. At least it was always a good phone call. And she went up for her third 5-point major under Glenn Twyford, who was another one of my heroes, and finished her championship in a month with 3 5-point majors. So I was really feeling pretty successful at that time. And Dolores had a litter from
same mother.
the same mother that was sired by champion Impromptu Ricochet, only he wasn't a champion at that time. And
Ricochet was sired by the last one that Trudy put all her eggs in one basket.
Brandwin
and that
New
was Brandwin
Legacy.
New Legacy.
right, and out of bitch of Barbara Schwartz's, out of Repartee, who was a really lovely bitch. And anyway, there were 3 tri-bitches in that litter, and I asked Dolores if she might sell me one of the tri-bitches. So she sent me this little bitch who came walking out of a crate at 4 months old and had an attitude like she was the star of the world, and whatever, that became champion Kemmerich's on the rebound, who at 9 months old, she was in the 6 to 9 class,
Yeah,
so we put her
6
in
to 9.
American bred.
To best of winners
Yeah, and
at the CC of A.
at the CC of A, right. And and then she went up at Southern Ohio also, didn't she, to get her second
Cleveland.
Cleveland,
It was
the Cleveland
Cleveland under.
specialty.
So here you are, 4 months into your breeding program, seriously, and you've already got champion Kemmerich's over satin and a national specialty winner and champion Kemmerich's on the rebound. Where do you go from there?
It was really exciting.
Opportunity knocked again.
It did, yes, because Dolores Hogan had sent Whirlaway back to Sally Lake because when she was having to move and relocate, nobody really was that excited about the dog. And Sally really didn't want him back at the time. So I asked Dolores if she would sell him to me. And she said, well, you'll have to call Sally about that. So I called her up, and Sally said, well, you know, you don't have to pay me for the dog, you know, and I don't really want to keep him at this time. So I'll ship him to you, and you can keep the crate. So that's how Whirlaway came to me. And I had seen his puppies from several litters that Dolores had, the litter that Silver Satin came from. There were 3 champions in that litter. And whatever, I had such a feeling about him as a sire, and so we promoted him
As
a sire first. And, you know, and then we started looking at the dog, who loved dog shows, not the table. We'd put him up on the table at the dog show, remember at Devon? And we'd start to groom him, and then, you know, and we'd stop and we'd look at him, and it would be like,
He'd put his ears back and his eyes indulged like,
yeah,
what am I doing here?
like, what's going on? Who's going to show this dog?
And
You
when we
put him on the
off
ground.
the table,
He was
Judy
amazing.
said, you hold him. And he was standing there with his ears back looking, and I went, no, you hold him. Nobody wanted to hold him until I took out that first piece of liver. He saw that liver, he pulled up his neck, he got his ears so tight on his head, And it was a great lesson in learning what projection is all about. The dog absolutely pulled himself together, and I think we both learned a lesson about projection and what an important part of it is for the collie, the show dog. You know, their whole deportment and how they carry themselves is a big part of who they are.
Exactly.
So at age 7...
Yeah, at age 7 he came out and finished. I think he was only shown about 10 or 11 times to finish, and, you know, though we had to finish him twice, because remember, there was some 2-point show ended up becoming 1 point.
Oh, that dog got disqualified.
Yeah, and we had to, and he was bald, you know, like completely out of coat. Didn't have a hot spot or anything like another one that we knew, but we had to take him to Bald Eagle Kennel Club because that was where you finish a bald collie. And he got his last point. But in the meantime, you know, he was used so effectively and, you know, became a really top producing sire.
So here you were sitting in your little house in Wayne, New Jersey, and you had these 3 dogs, Silver Satin on the rebound, Whirlaway in your yard.
In my cellar.
In your cellar.
They all lived downstairs. They had a little pen out behind the house.
And you would look at these dogs on a daily basis, and you would start your creative process in your mind. How did you put all those pieces together to come up with exactly what you wanted, if you took bits and pieces of those 3?
Well, you know, Silver Satin was such a beautiful bitch. If I could have cloned her, I probably would have done it. It wasn't like she was faultless, but she was pretty close. And the hard thing is when you start with something that good, that, you know, to realize that you may never get something that's better. But I didn't think that way. I was going to give it a try. And I decided to breed her to Impromptu Ricochet, who was the new legacy son out of Repartee, and that I had seen first when he was shown to Les Canavan. And I think he was reserve at that show. He was just a puppy, but I thought I loved his face at that time, and I loved his pedigree, which was, you know, suited my bitch perfectly. And so we bred Silver Satin to Ricochet.
Now, hadn't you bred her to New Legacy as well?
I did, but I think that litter came later, and
that was later. That was Midnight Sky.
That was Midnight Sky, because we had such. From Silver Satin's litter by Ricochet, we had Night Rider and Champion Clarion Blue Persuasion that Johnny and I ended up co-owning at the end, and another dog that finished from that litter, and also the bitch that I sent back to Jean Cullen, who was Ricochet's owner, and who she named Lorien Black Satin. She ended up being the dam of Champion Lorien After Hours Blues when she was bred to Silver Satin's litter brother, Champion Cleland's Blue Yonder.
And really started Carol Stanley and the After Hours Collies off on a good footing.
Definitely a good footing.
Before I go back to Night Rider, we had a lot of windshield time together driving to dog shows, usually in a broken down car. And whenever we heard a rumble in the car or an engine that wasn't working,
if there was a noise, up went the radio. We just turned it on louder.
We were so mechanical, we just made it louder so we couldn't hear anything.
We'd get to the dog shows sometimes, and I had this old Ford wagon. Then the tailgate sometimes gave us a problem and wouldn't open. So one of us had to push on it, and the other one had to screw the tailgate. Otherwise, we were stuck there. We couldn't get the dogs out to show them because they were in crates and we couldn't move them.
And people would walk by and look at us as Judy's going, screw it faster, screw it faster. But it worked. You know, we were probably the prime example of if you believe in something and you are determined, it will come to you. Because we never had any money. We never had a decent car to go in. I was flying all over on a student standby pass, which was about $35 long after I turned 18.
Well, remember, I bought that car from the 2Js when they were buying a brand new car. They had this wagon, a big
Safari
Chrysler wagon that they weren't giving them much money on a trade-in. So I said, well, gee, I'll buy that car. And he was so annoyed at me that he cursed the car. And so then he didn't realize he'd have to travel with me in this car, which got about 4 miles to the gallon. And it threw a wheel bearing. everything that could ever happen to a car happened to that one, and it was all your fault because you were so annoyed that I bought it out from under you.
But the radio was nice and
The
loud.
radio was good, yeah.
In those early conversations riding in the car, it was always clear to me that you had a great admiration for Mrs. Browning of Tocallan and Trudy Mangles of Brandwyn and Edith Levine of Glen Knowles. Where did that admiration stem from about those three women? They were very different in personality.
Well, Mrs. Browning was a person that I never got to know personally very well because her heyday had passed. And so had Trudy's in a way. She was so successful in the 50s, but we became friends in the 60s when she was kind of on her way out of dogs. So I got to know her more as a person. Val Nicetta, who was my dear friend from the time I lived in California. She never fit in California either. We both had to get out of there. And she moved to the East Coast too, but we did a lot of breedings together. And we spent a lot of time with Trudy, going to lunch and picking her brain. And I still hear from her all the time. She's still in Arizona and still sharp as a tack, very involved in politics and nutrition
And what
things
about
like
Edith?
that. Edith became so special to me. She was such a hard person to get to warm up to you, it seemed. You know, she always intimidated people. When I had first moved to New Jersey, because I had Whirlaway, who was by her dog Nights with Sky, she had wanted to show the dog off a little. And so Hilda Rickenbaugh was visiting from Colorado. And she said that she and Hilda she'd like to bring Hilda over to see the dog. And I thought, oh, holy cow, you know, what am I going to fix these people for lunch? I had to do something. I didn't know what Jewish people ate, really. So I went to the deli. I bought all this roast beef and I bought a little ham. I had all these great sandwiches. And Edith sat there and ate all the ham. And I was stuck with this roast beef forever. But we got to become, very friendly. And it was Edith who gave me the thrill of a lifetime when she put my 6 to 9 puppy to winner's pitch and best of winners at the National. At that time, we weren't good friends, but we became closer later. She was like my mother. And actually, she was more to me than just a mother. And when I pass her exit on the highway, she moved upstate in her later years, and we used to visit a lot. We played Scrabble together, and we went to dog shows together. My daughter and I dragged her out, to come to the shows with us. She went, she went every place that we could take her. I still cry when I go past her exit. I get teary.
And Edith was someone who didn't suffer fools gladly, that's for sure.
No, she didn't. She called a spade a spade.
And she could be a hard teacher. I remember one seminar, she was talking about training puppies, and your name came up in her conversation about keeping your house clean and training puppies. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, I remember. She said, well, you can go to visit Judy at the house, and maybe the kitchen is not clean, but the dog yard is immaculate.
That was Edith.
That was Edith.
She appreciated you for what you did.
She thought I was a great handler, too. Not really, but we were at a puppy match that Jim Mangles was judging, and I had a really cute tri-male puppy, and I'm out there in the ring. Of course, I was a little bit plumper than I am at the moment, and she said to Linda Smith, who was our protege, well, look at Judy in the ring. She's very fat, but you don't see her in the ring. You only see the dogs. This is what you have to do.
And poor Linda, who was a stick.
Whenever Edith gave you a compliment, it always had a barb on it. But she could laugh at herself. When they introduced her at a seminar, instead of introducing her as a living legend, they introduced her as a living relic. And she got hysterical. She laughed herself to death and always told that story about being a living relic.
With success coming early to you in '69 with finishing Silver Satin, winning the National, how did you continue to learn as a fledgling breeder?
Well, I had you for my mentor. I think we mentored each other on the way up, and we read everything that there was to read.
Traded magazines?
all the time. Collie Q's was like a Bible, and and I think we listened. We went to seminars together. We were
Club
always
meetings.
kennel hopping. Every summer we'd take a vacation and go out to the Midwest and visit Viley kennels.
Twin
we visited
Creeks,
Twin Creeks.
2J's.
Yep.
Culmore.
Carol Chapman and Culmore.
And what was special about those trips? Even if, you like some of the dogs or not all of them, there was so much. I know I learned a lot from those trips.
Oh yeah, there was just so much learning, even if the dogs were not, exactly up your personal vision. You could, Viley would grow up so many puppies from the same litter, and you get a chance to see the development of their dogs. And Twin Creeks with the way that she leash broke her dogs. I just remember her dogs always showed so well when she'd walk in the ring with one. And I said, "How do you do that?" And she said, "Well, if they don't show, I don't keep them." And
she didn't.
She didn't.
She did. She didn't.
She was a great handler, and I think that we miss a lot of these people in the breed.
Do you think dog shows were different then?
Yeah, they were. Definitely they were. When we went to dog shows, we used to seek out the competition.
And embrace it.
We wanted to go to the shows with the biggest entries and beat the best dogs there. And if you didn't, and plenty of times you didn't, at least, we respected the ones that went up. We never went to a dog show where we didn't sit by the ring and know
till the end.
Until the end, and we knew what dogs, who they were sired by. We knew who won the show. I even ask people who I mentor now, and it bothers me when I say to them, they tell me what they did at the show, and I say, but, well, who had winner's bitch, or who went best of breed? And they have no idea. It's like, it's a different atmosphere.
And we just didn't learn it at the shows either, because in those early years, Judy was an operator for a couple of different companies and places. And we were like Monday morning quarterbacks, because, as soon as I'd get up or as soon as I'd get home from school, because I was still in college, pick up the phone, and we knew what went on all over the country, because in those days, long-distance calls were really expensive.
I was the switchboard operator and the receptionist for the busiest company in the whole North Jersey area. I mean, I had my own telephone repairman, and I had the Monday morning grapevine. I would call California. I would talk to Janet Leake in the morning. I would call California and find out what happened over the weekend at the shows. I had a whole, repertoire of people that I called. And then, I would share the gossip with everybody from all over the country.
And we all wanted to know, who the hot dogs were that people were interested in. It wasn't just who won the show. It was, 5 or 6 people would all go crazy over one particular dog. And, of course, we wanted to know more. Maybe we could incorporate that into our breeding programs.
Mm-hmm. We did. The company went out of business, by the way. I think they went bankrupt, but by that time I'd retired from that job and moved upstate.
People rely a lot on the internet today, and certainly it's a whole lot easier to type in a name and pull up a pedigree, to access a picture of a dog somewhere, things that we didn't have the option of doing. We had to do it the old-fashioned way, to go and see the dog, or sit down with a pen and paper and write out a pedigree. How do you think that balances out in the long run?
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, when I would sit down and write out a pedigree, and I'd put the 2 names together in the 5th generation, and I would try to visualize the dogs at that time, and especially as they progressed farther toward the dogs that I had there, what I was looking for in each breeding and what the dogs brought to the table. It was really a learning experience. A pedigree was more than just a bunch of names and champions on a piece of paper. It was what the dog brought to the table, and eventually you had some perspective on what certain dogs would produce. Now I have a pedigree program. I love it. I can just punch in 2 names, and it generates me a 5-generation pedigree. I don't have to think about anything.
But
And
is
I
that a
can't
good
remember,
thing?
it's not a good thing at all because, you know, I sometimes I have to think hard to remember the dogs in that pedigree. When I wrote them, I learned things every time I did it.
You know, 10, 12 years ago, they came up with this whole statistical way of looking at pedigrees with inbreeding coefficients, what percentages certain dogs have, and people got so into it, and they were so interested in looking at those percentages. But if you had one dog that took up 62% of the pedigree, if you didn't know what he looked like,
What
what
difference
good
would
was
it
a
make?
statistic? And I think
Exactly.
we lose some of that today. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Clarion breeding program and where you progressed. From one of the early litters with silver satin, things were getting a little tough for you, and you sold a lot of dogs because you couldn't afford to keep them.
Well, I couldn't afford to keep them and keep doing what I was doing. So, you know, in order to be able to finance showing in the next group, sometimes I had to part with dogs that I didn't want to part with. And
One of the important ones was a young tri-male.
that was Night Rider. And Jean Cullen and I were very good friends, and she had a couple in San Francisco who were just starting out in dogs and, you know, and had the means to be able to show one and were really interested in the collie. And so on her advice, I sold Night Rider to them.
And their name?
Were Tony and Lucille Sanchez Correa, who finished the dog. He was out with George Schlinker as a young dog, and he finished fairly quickly. He wasn't used very much. He was at the National when the Gladiator went best of breed, and I remember people from the East Coast, Barb Linder, calling me up to tell me she'd seen this beautiful dog that I'd bred. And then we didn't hear much from them, from the dog or anything, and it turned out that the Sanchez Correas had some problems with their company, and things didn't work out the way they wanted, and the dog was with the handler for 4 or 5 years. And I called him up one day, George Schlinker, to see what what he was doing with the dog, and he said, "Well, if you pay the handling bill, I'll ship him to you." So I borrowed some money from someone that I worked with.
And if I remember right, you were really on tough times, but you had this strong belief that this dog could make a difference. And it's a story of, again, believing in your dreams. It wasn't about how much money you had or anything else. It's
Well,
about
he
believing.
was such a beautiful puppy, and the pedigree was so important to me. So I bought him back. In fact, you went to Florida and picked him up. And I got him back home, and everybody on the East Coast was excited about him. He bred 9 bitches in the first month that he was home, and they all 9 missed. And they supposedly had done a sperm count, Schlinker did, before he sent me the dog, but I don't believe that probably was the case. Anyway, there was one bitch who they said was in whelp. Well, she was. She ended up having a mutt litter. But I figured if that was one, we were going to be safe. Anyway, I took him up to Cornell, which was a fiasco, but eventually they did find out that the dog had a staph infection in the prostate, and we put him on antibiotics, and he sired.
Do you remember what happened with the antibiotics?
He went deaf.
He went deaf.
He was on erythromycin, and I couldn't believe he was the most obedient dog in the world, and he was on this antibiotic, and I'd call him, and he'd just keep walking in the other direction, and I didn't know what was going on.
And 20 years later, I had a bitch named Arabesque, and she was on the table, and all of a sudden, it was Nancy McDonald, said to me, "I don't think she can hear." And so we're throwing nothing. And I was all over the place looking for reasons, what would cause this and everything. And then I talked to Judy, and she said, "Remember Night Rider with and found out that she had been on erythromycin. And if my vet couldn't find anything in the vet books, but she looked in a PDR, and it said can cause reversible deafness in babies. Just an interesting thing if anybody ever comes across it, but
Well,
did
they
the trick
probably
for
don't
him.
use that
Probably
antibiotic
not.
anymore, so I think, we're probably dinosaurs over that. There was an interesting story with the Night Rider because he was up at Cornell for a week, And I kept waiting for them to give me the results of the tests. And they kept stalling me. And I said, what's wrong? And they said, well, we can't get him to give a sample. And this is a dog who bred 9 bitches in a month. And, you know, so I said, I'll be up there in an hour and a half, which is as far as I am from Cornell. So I went up there with a bitch that was on her way out of season, and in about 15 seconds, we had a big collection, and that's how we found out how lucky that was, because, you know, dogs have these problems all the time that nobody can ever solve. At least we solved his. And he went on to be something that was exactly what we'd hoped.
And really started, you know, I would say he was probably more the tail male sire. Whirlaway was more on the bitch sides.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think was the best thing he produced?
Well, he produced quite a few really good champions. I had Clarion's All Night Long, who was a night rider son, and he won both majors. He got
One of them under Steve Field.
Under Steve Field.
You were surprised, but Steve really liked him. It was Collie Club in Northern New Jersey.
Well, I remember when I walked in the ring with the dog. I was late to go in the class because the dog had screaming diarrhea, and we were in the 9 to 12 puppy class. I walked in at the end, and the dog pulled himself up, and Steve Field just looked at him and stared at him. It was a big class, and he ended up giving him the class without ever gating him, which was all right because he didn't have the greatest rear in the world, but he was a really pretty dog. And then he ended up going winner's dog, and I remember Les Canavan at that show. I think she was reserved to me, and she fell in the ring with the dog that she was showing. I felt really bad,
But he was a dog who left here early and didn't leave a big legacy necessarily here.
No, but he did.
But
where
now
he went.
he's got a huge legacy here because of his trials and tribulations and his use.
Right, he went to Brazil, and before he went to Brazil, actually, he ended up getting his second major under Jim Mangles at a specialty in Detroit, and I always wanted to run an ad with his picture and say the dog that both Mangles and Field could agree on, but I thought that was a little pushy, and so I never did, but it was always in the back of my mind. But I hadn't offered the dog for sale. They called me from Brazil and were interested in buying him, and I really needed the money. And I had Night Rider, who was still siring at the time. And so I decided I could do it. But he became the top producing sire in Brazil for quite a while. And Lynn Butler had also bred to him and several times, and he was the sire of Champion Milas, Gold in the Clouds, and several other bitches. And she sold a lot of his offspring to Brazil. Basically, they went to Lakefield Collies. That's Alexander Carvalho, and to Antonio Costa della Piaggi, who is Windhaven Collies.
The kennel names are easier than their names.
Yeah, exactly. Windhaven and Lakefield, and they bred together for a long time. Now they're not so together, but. Lynn ended up not that long ago, I guess 10 years ago, getting a dog back from Antonino that was a champion Windhaven Stranger in Paradise.
From her friend. Wasn't he a gift from
Marcos? From a friend of hers, and brought that dog over, who of course has done some really wonderful siring for Lynn. But,
and has sort of made it go full circle to bring All Night Long back to this country.
Yeah, exactly. And, and his get, were all over Brazil and Argentina. I judged the specialty in Sao Paulo in Brazil in, I believe it was 89 or 90. And my best of breed there, I had 110 collies. It was amazing. I think it was the biggest entry they had ever had. And my best of breed was an all-night-long son that came from the veterans class, and they were shocked because the veterans never won there. But he was a brother to Gold in the Clouds that Lynn had sold down there as a young dog, and I really had wanted to get him back to use him and stud here. And my reserve to the best in show was another all-night-long son. And But it was exciting to judge in a place where you didn't know the people or the handlers.
Right.
Alex, who had made it possible for me to judge there, didn't show to me in the classes. He only showed to me in the stud dog class. And he came in the ring with 30 get with his
Wow.
stud dog. Obviously he won. It was, it was an exciting show, but I was so thrilled to see how much quality and how the quality had changed down there in just a short time. So those Brazilian dogs aren't exactly strangers to the American scene.
Go back to Silver Satin. You bred her to Ricochet. You bred her to Knight Rider. Do you have any other breedings?
Oh yeah, she did. I bred her to the Gladiator. I think I was influenced a little by Silver Satin's handler.
So I had to breed the Gladiator's mother to Knight Rider.
Yeah, so we had to do this. But anyway, my bitch whelps on Thanksgiving Day. I remember I was living in Newark at the time, and Lisa and I ended up eating scrambled eggs for Thanksgiving dinner, and she had her litter 7 sable merle males at a time when sable merles were not popular. 1 sable merle bitch that she bit the end of the tail off of, and a blue bitch that at 3 weeks got laid on, but she survived. And that was Clarion the Silver Vixen, who ended up being the dam of 5 champions and, is in all the pedigrees that I have. So I have a little Gladiator back there. The 7 sable merle dogs were Christmas pets. When I think about that litter now, I just think
How different things would be.
how different things would be, because I know those puppies were beautiful, but at that time, if what was I going to do with all those sable merle males? They were nice little Christmas puppies.
Well, don't you agree, too, in breeding dogs, timing is everything? Where you are, who you're with, and what happens, so many things could be different. And I think as Judy and I are in this longer and longer, you get to think back on all the woulda, coulda, shouldas, how things just might have been different.
Right. If I hadn't sold this one, if this one hadn't died young, if this one would have ever had a litter,
And while there have been, I'm sure over 100 Clarion champions, there are always certain individuals that play key roles. A lot of people today, or I guess over the years, have been number makers, and just try to finish as many. But no matter how you look at it in any kennel, I think there will always be some core individuals that continue to maintain what the line is supposed to look like, act like, be like. So who do you think were some of the, coming down from Knight Rider, who were some of the key individuals?
Well, I can tell you that thinking about fate and twists of fate and things that happen was Champion Paradise's Along Came Jones, who was sired by the Knight Rider's son, Cloak and Dagger. And Val Nocetta asked me when I came back from Spain after I finished getting my degree in Spanish, if I would take Jones at stud at my place. And so he came to me in September, which is really a crummy time to breed collies. I never like to breed in the fall because the puppies that are born, in December, January, just never seem to come into coat at the right time. They're not ready for the specialties. But I did the breeding. I bred Champion Clarion's Too Much Heaven, who was a Light Up the Sky daughter, to Along Came Jones. And we got, Champion Clarion, The Color of Light.
Okay.
No, Color My World.
Color My World.
Oh.
Let's
And
go back to the sire of that litter, Light Up the Sky. He was extremely influential. And his breeding?
He was by Knight Rider, and his dam was an after-hours bitch,
Cherchez
La Femme, who, see, this is what happens when somebody prints your pedigrees on the computer.
Was she by Blue Yonder? Or,
She was she went back to Lorien Black Satin,
Okay.
who was Knight Rider's litter sister. Anyway, he was a stud fee puppy to me, and I was thrilled to be able to get him, and he did some great producing. He was the top producing Blue Merle sire in the breed until somebody passed him by, those records. But, he was a really wonderful sire, and the sire of the Platinum Minx.
And she was best puppy at the Collie Club of America one year, one of his daughters, right?
Right. Best puppy at the CC of A. She finished with 3 big majors, and by the time she was 10 months old.
So where does he fit in your pedigrees today, Light Up the Sky?
He's in almost everything.
And which way did he stem down? Through Platinum Minx or?
No, actually, well, through Platinum Minx, though I never really got anything from her litter. I bred her to Champion Linridge Shades of Night, who was by Champion Bray Gates in the Blues, but nothing ever really came from that litter. I sold a pretty tri-bitch from her to a girl in Texas. Her name was Clarion's Black Dahlia. And we bred her to an inbred Light Up the Sky son, a double dilute dog.
Poetry in Motion?
No, that was Clarion Touchstone.
Okay.
And I got back a really beautiful blue bitch puppy who was Champion Clarion Touched by Poetry.
Okay.
And through her, I bred her to Champion the Meadows Notorious and got Careless Whispers. And
now, did you lease Notorious?
I did. He was a really lovely dog who went back to, he had some of Tartanside in his dam's half of the pedigree. He was bred by Linda Burns. I really loved his sire a lot, the Meadow Simply Smashing, but there was PRA on that side of the family. Notorious was test bred, and test bred clear at Cornell. That was a lot of work in those days, the test breedings and things. And whatever, I leased Notorious. He had the most beautiful tricolor face, was such a balanced dog, a beautiful mover, and I decided I needed a little infusion of fresh blood, and he gave me some really good things.
And you've had luck. You've had different dogs at stud at your kennel over the years and leased them. Another one that comes to mind is the Gambit's Hurricane of Bruin, who you also leased later.
Right. I saw that dog. I loved Freeze Frame, but there were things about, the dog that didn't exactly fit into my picture. And Twister, Hurricane Bruin's mother, was a really pretty tri-bitch named Gambit's Hurricane Alley that I gave a reserve to at a big specialty in California when Freeze Frame took the breed. And when I judged the National in Reno, they showed Twister to me in the 6 to 9 class as a puppy, and he wasn't really ready to win at the time. He was immature, but there were things that I really liked about him, and I remember going home from that show and thinking about it, and I thought, I really could use, I liked the dog's face, and I liked his overall picture. I really could use something like that in my breeding program, so I called the Gambit girls to see if he were for sale. And he wasn't, because Nancy Anstruther had taken him back to Canada with her, and I thought, well, she's got a lot of nerve. So a couple of years later, I judged the Collie Club of Canada, and Twister happened to be up there at that show. Linda Robbins, smart girl that she is, knew that I liked the dog so much as a puppy, and he was my best of breed. And I ended up spending, that was the first time that I met Nancy Anstruther, and we ended up I think we stayed awake for 2 or 3 whole days talking. And I said, I have a bitch at home that I know would be perfect for this dog, and you should send him down to me. And she said, well, why don't you just send me the bitch and we'll co-breed the litter? So I did, and we ended up with 4 champions from that litter, and 2 of them apiece. And then I was lucky enough to have Twister come and stay with me, and I used him quite a bit in my breeding program, and it really straightened out. He wasn't a complete outcross, in his pedigree. He had a lot of, common ancestors back in the,
Who would they have been?
Probably things that went back to Ricochet, and I have his pedigree here. We can look at that a little bit later. But he was you know, I loved the dog, and he did a lot to straighten out my rear ends, and you
And
know,
didn't he get his Register of Merit title while he was with you?
well, I'm sure he did. He became a Rom very easily. He really deserved the title, and I'm sure it was, you know, a lot of it had to do with bitches that he bred. But you know, I wanted to go back a little to Along Came Jones. I talked about doing that breeding in what you call it in September with Too Much Heaven, and you know, I expected he was a 2-year-old dog, and he went back to a show in Pittsburgh that in February that year to the pet, and I didn't want him to go to that specialty. I didn't think he was ready, but Valerie had really wanted to show him.
This was to special him?
To special him, and he ended up picking up a virus there, and he died. So that dog he became a Rom sire, and he produced all his champions in that short period of time from September to January when he was at my house. When I think about what he probably could have done for the breed if, you know, we had had that dog around a little bit longer. But I did actually, from that breeding, I got Clarion Color My World, who was the sire of World Class, who never finished because he really didn't like the show ring, but sired such beautiful things for me. He was the sire of Marmalade Skies,
Who
the
was
white bitch
reserve
who
at
was
the National?
reserve at the National as an 8-month-old puppy, who won the biggest specialty on the on the East Coast when she won in Ohio under Peggy Conger. And you know, she was just a beautiful white, and that was how I got involved in the white thing. You know, I didn't want whites. I definitely didn't want a sable merle-headed white.
And now you're the queen of the whites.
Well, I don't know about that, but but you know, there was something so appealing about this puppy, and I have a picture of her at 3 weeks old that somebody took in my yard with the sun shining down on her, and it was like this little heavenly light. And she was just the most adorable puppy. You know, she came out and, you know, and put white collies on the map. Not that there hadn't been other lovely whites.
And she produced another white champion or two, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. She
Was it
went to
Buttermilk
Buttermilk Skies, then went to California, and Evelyn Godown, who co-bred that litter with me, had champion Roblin, Poppin' Fresh. They were all sable merle-headed whites. And so we advanced from the time when Silver Satin's sable merles didn't get to shine.
I think most breeders, as we started to talk about earlier, start off with a very definite mental image of what they want and the characteristics they want to incorporate. I think that template is based on some dogs that they've seen, you know, in the past. And so early years of breeding are spent line breeding, sometimes inbreeding, to really lock in those characteristics so that it's not just that they're there, but they will continue to be there. But to me, the greatest test of any master breeder is their ability to do the judicious outcrosses when necessary. And you've certainly kept your line healthy in that way by bringing in the outcrosses at various times, and why. And I'm just curious why you chose certain dogs at certain times, what they brought to the table, and how you bred them back into the family.
When I got to Hurricane Brew, and I had the dogs in my family had the shape that I wanted, they had the picture, I had the expression that I had been looking for, but I didn't have the bodies I always wanted. I wanted a better rear, and so that dog brought, and the outcross before the Notorious, both of those tri-dogs brought in qualities that I felt like I needed at the time. And the hard thing is, you know, when you do an outcross, to select those, the selection's really the important thing. You have to select for the thing that you're breeding for, and sometimes it means that, you know, it wouldn't necessarily have been the puppy that you would have picked from your litter, but it's the puppy that brings to the table, or that looks like it's going to bring the qualities that you needed. And of course, then there's always the thing with health. And, you know, we went through the battle of the PRA thing, and I had leased champion Breagates in the Blues, who was the most beautiful collie. You know, a blue dog that I had seen in ages. When I went to California, I saw him at the specialty there when George Horn judged, and he was just a young dog. Janine Walker Keith showed him for his owner, who was Monica Stinson. Anyway, I became good friends with Monica, and I leased in the Blues and brought him home. And a lot of people used him because everybody, loved the dog. Beautiful face, great coat. The pedigree was wonderful, but there were some unknown things on the pedigree, and it ended up that the dog was a PRA carrier, which was a really hard thing to have to swallow. I mean, I had all these people that had used the dog, and while we didn't know everything at the time of the dog's background, this was obvious. I had to call them all and tell them the news. And then it was the idea that, we lost a lot of really good offspring because it was so expensive to test breed. And I placed a lot of really nice bitches that I probably would have kept because I felt like if I couldn't go through the thing and do the test breeding, I just had to eliminate them from the breeding program. And so, the health thing is very important.
Who do you think were some of your most influential bitches as far as giving you another generation or a lot of champions?
Well, the Gladiator daughter out of Silver Satin was one that produced champions for me from various sires. Right. And, she was a really nice bitch who actually had a problem. When she was 6 months old, I showed her to Alex Gibbs, who loved Silver Satin. And he put me second in a class of 2. And I said, how could this be? So afterwards, of course, at that time, we had a lot more respect for judges. But I approached him and I said, we chatted for a while. And I said, I thought you might have liked my blue bitch puppy. And he said, oh, honey, I loved her, but have you opened her mouth lately? And she was undershot. But it wasn't really a problem in our family of dogs, and I thought, this bitch is so pretty, I'm going to keep her. And thank God I did, because, she never produced a bad bite for me. And
well, we figured when she got smushed as a puppy, it smushed her head this way.
Probably, because she got laid on when she was 3 weeks old. I thought she was going to die, but we kept squeezing her back into shape, and she finally, grew up looking normal. And then Brilliant Disguise, who was the dam
outstanding in her field.
Yes, outstanding in her field. We have such beautiful pictures of her. Sable Merle, of course, she was by World Class out of Too Much Heaven, and the Light Up the Sky daughter. And that bitch didn't like the show ring, but she produced me the most beautiful puppies, and she's in, like a major player in almost every pedigree that I have, because when you come down the line, she was the dam of Incognito, and, who was the sire of Smoke and Mirrors, and, all my pedigrees are full of this bitch, who was gorgeous.
Of all of the dogs that you've had over all these years, which one that you've bred or owned do you think came closest to your mental template of perfection?
This is really hard, because it's just hard to pick one out of a bunch of really good ones. And when you start out with a bitch like Silver Satin, who was actually like a 1 in a million, and how I ever, got so lucky to have her, I'm not sure. But, I guess Ribbons is one that,
that is?
Champion Clarion Ribbon in the Sky. And, who was by Excalibur. Excalibur has a pedigree that's line bred to, through Incognito to, and his litter brother, Clarion Allen Cloud Alliance, who went to Argentina and then came back and sired for me and sired.
And they were the
10
ones
champions.
sired by Hurricane of Bruin.
They were by Hurricane of Bruin out of Brilliant Disguise.
Okay.
And, I think Ribbons probably is, and Ribbons was one I was lucky enough to be able to campaign, because Knight Rider's former owners called me after so many years and wondered if I would remember them, and they began to show dogs for me to, fund our campaign. and I got to show a bitch that was beautiful. And
What is it about Ribbons that brings her so close to your ideal?
well, her headpiece is so beautiful, and to me, she has the most beautiful expression, and had the attitude of a showgirl. She just was, she was so exciting to me. She reminded me a lot of Silver Satin, probably, now the way that we groom these dogs and do them up, maybe a little bit fancier. But, I don't know. It's hard to just pick one dog out of when I think they run through my mind. I think about Smoke and Mirrors, who was such a beautiful dog, went to Argentina and became the #1 dog in the herding group when he went to be at stud with my friends, the Wisemans of Allen Cloud Collies, and sent him back home. But I missed a lot of time using the dog as a stud dog because he was down there. It's hard to just pick one dog.
Well, good thoughts in those days. Why don't we take a break and come back, and I have a few more questions about your philosophy on dogs.
Clarion is nestled in the foothills of the Catskill Mountains of New York. The changing seasons create a wonderful canvas to highlight the Clarion collies. The emerald green backdrop of spring and summer, the orange and yellow foliage of fall, and the stark beauty of a winter's snow. Visitors can watch the collies bounding in the large paddocks and hillsides, a sight that has inspired the artist in Judy and helped her create her personal interpretation of the collie standard, one that is often referred to as unmistakably Clarion. At his 5-acre site in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, John Buddy and Tartanside Collies have produced a constant stream of winners, including more than 150 champions and 12 Register of Merit dogs. Collectively, the kennel's sires and dams have produced 350 champions, among them multiple group, best in show, and national specialty winners. Tartanside stock forms the basis for many of today's top kennels. In 2014, John Buddy received a 50-year membership pin from the Collie Club of America, and in December of 2015, he was named AKC's Breeder of the Year.
After all these years and all these experiences, all these dogs, all these litters, one has no choice but to gain certain perspectives and philosophies about being a dog breeder. I'm sure in those early days when we were driving those rattle traps up and down the highway, we never really dreamed we'd be as successful as we were, but luck had a good deal to do with it, as well as skill and perseverance, and most of all, determination. But over all those years, you do gain different insights and different perspectives and things, and I'd like to hit on some of that now. Start with the fact that after 20 years or so, you opted to get a judge's license. What was your inspiration to do that?
I think that after breeding and working hard to produce a family of dogs, I really felt like it was time to give something back to the breed. I felt like I had something to offer. And I was really excited about the idea of getting my license.
How long do you think it really takes to get enough perspective to be a good judge?
50 years.
No, well, you did it after like 20. I only say it, I see a
I
lot of
think
people today, 5 years, and they want to be a judge, and I'm not sure that they have the perspective that's necessary.
It takes way longer than that, because I know that the things that I thought I valued the most probably changed over time, and I realized the longer you breed, you find the more hard to get virtues deserve to be rewarded more than they are. You know, and I think that, I think all of us start out thinking that we know a lot more than we know. And I wish sometimes that I had the opportunity to rejudge some things, or reevaluate, because my perspective changes.
I always look back, and I think what comes up for me is the opportunities that I'd missed with some of the people that I think were some of the great breeders that I was too shy to talk to when I was young, or too into my own thing to pay attention. And, don't you ever want to go back and have a conversation with somebody that's no longer here?
Oh, you better believe it. But I think we had heroes in those old days that, we had people that we respected so much. When we went to the National, we went because we wanted these particular people to see these dogs and to acknowledge them, and we wanted their approval. We had Billy Ashenbrenner and Glenn Twyford and Betty Crawford,
Alex
Gibbs,
Noel Denton, a lot of the people.
Edith Levine.
And I think maybe in the whole scheme of dog shows, and I don't mean just collies, in all breeds, I do believe when we went to dog shows, we went for the opinions, because these were the people that we held way up here. We wanted their acknowledgement, and if we didn't get it, we might have been crushed, but it also made us go home and reevaluate things, because we would think that we missed something. Don't you agree?
Oh, I definitely agree. And and whether or not we won at a national was not as important as having the people who were our heroes look down at our dogs and act like they approved of what they could see, what we had done, and we got their acknowledgement. That was the thing. If you didn't have that, you didn't have anything.
Mean as much.
No, it didn't.
I think Judy and I, as a handler, there were certain judges that I could show her dogs, which didn't look like my dogs, to the same judges. But in those days, the great judges all believed that the great ones all looked alike from any breed. Alex Gibbs, I think, would head the list for both of us. But Alex had his own way of teaching you things. That 5-point major with silver satin, shown by this skinny kid who was nobody. Nobody knew who I was, but
nobody knew who the bitch was.
Or the bitch, and she won. And years later, I remember he gave a 5-point major to a dog I had called Critics' Choice. And his comment to me when he put him up, he said, and he was from the same town in Scotland as my grandfather. And he said to me, "John, I believe this one's going to be your next great sire." And he wound up being the top sire of the 20th century. But there was another time when I showed a son of Critics' Choice who was, a little above a mediocre dog, that I was trying very hard to finish to get that last major. And it took a while. And finally, there was a small major on the head at some little show. The dog was in full coat. I didn't know if Alex would like him or not, but I was glad to have the chance. So I went and I won. And I was so overjoyed because it was done, not so much with anything else. And I remember thanking him profusely, and he turned to me and he said, "John, don't get too excited. He's just the best of a poor lot." And those were the lessons we learned in those days.
Exactly.
And respected him for it.
I remember him doing the same thing to me when I showed Midnight Sky to him. And Mary Hutchinson was in the ring with a really pretty bitch, and we were battling it out for best of winners, and I think I needed to go best of winners to get the major on the dog. And it was a muddy, do you remember that day? It was at Old Dominion in the mud. In fact, we had Silver Satin there, and you couldn't get her to the ring because you couldn't carry her. Anyway, I gated the dog down and back, and as I came back in front of him, I slipped right on my butt and landed right down on the ground. And he gave me his hand, and he said, "You really fell for me, honey. You're best of winners." But later on, we chatted, and I said, "I'm so glad that you liked my dog." And he said, "Well, he's a nice dog, honey, but he ain't what his mother is." He could tell you, and and you appreciated it.
It was true respect. It wasn't respect because you won once. What makes a good judge.
No, when we had people like that, I think of Pat Starkweather and Jane Youngjohns and, so many of the people that...
You never heard them say, "He's my type," because all good collies were their type. And today, I think, like I said, people compartmentalize things and they just want to box you in and put a label on you.
Or it doesn't matter. They just want to win, and they don't care who who the judge is or whatever. All wins are equal to them, and let's make a major. And, but now when it takes 4 or 5 dogs to get a major someplace, and some big kennels can enter, 5 of their own and make their own majors, it just doesn't have the same meaning. Exactly.
In the 40-odd years that you bred, what do you think were some of the hardest qualities to go out and get?
Well, I think the hardest thing to keep is expression. You never can breed away from expression. And, once you see it, then you have to have it. And so whatever, no matter what kind of an outcross you make, there are certain intrinsic things like the light head and, and profile and balance that you have to keep, or you lose them.
Was expression sort of drummed? I know for me, it was something my mentors were always reminding me how important expression is, and would always remind me about the part of the Collie Standard which said the Collie not be judged correctly until you've looked at its expression. So I think it's something that's there. I'm curious, do you think it still holds the same weight that it once did?
No, I don't think
Why?
so, because I don't think people breed necessarily these days for details. It's hard to, to find people. I think they breed more for the overall picture, for the dog of the hour, for the showmanship, exactly, the presentation. And those are all nice things to have.
Do you think in general the breed is losing, a lot of good expression?
I have a hard time finding it in, in the judging assignments that I have. Doing the national this year, I was thrilled to have found dogs, and in classes that had the expression that I was looking for, but I found a lot more that they were wide between the eyes. I think that's such a big problem these days, the incorrect eye placement.
I think when we first started, you worried more about big light eyes. And that corrected itself because people, again, expression was drummed, so the breeders all went on there. And
but you can't just learn expression from a book. You can have the words read to you 100 times, but if you don't have a mentor who actually can point out expression, you end up having an epiphany when you actually finally see it. You've read the words 100,000 times. And then one's standing in front of you, and somebody whose opinion is important to you, who you think, knows what a pretty face is, points out the things about that expression, and suddenly, you get it.
And I think mentoring is even different today. My favorite story of all was my mentor, Pat Starkweather, told me that when she first got started, the big goal for anybody was to win at the Westminster Kennel Club. And those were the days when they had big 5-point entries and whatever. So Pat she went first with a pet, and it didn't do well at all. And she was a little forlorn, so then she spent a lot of money and she bought a show dog. And she went to the garden, and it didn't do any good there either. And she told me she was really upset about it, and she didn't really know the Collie people, but she knew that Mrs. Long of Noranda was a very famous Collie person. And she said that sheepishly she went up to Mrs. Long and said to her, you know, introduced herself and said, "Could you tell me what's wrong with my dog? I don't understand. The judge didn't even look at it or give it a ribbon." And she said, "Well, let's go look at her." And she walked down the bench with this strange new friend named Pat and went over her bitch carefully and examined it. And Pat said she didn't say anything. She said, "Come with me, young lady." And she went over to the next row of benching, to this bench where there was this beautiful sable bitch on the bench. And she said, "I want you to look at this one, you know, and I want you to look at this and that." And she went over the bitch's head. She took her down off the bench. She gated her up and down the benching aisle. And Pat said the whole standard finally came alive, and I understood what the words meant. And she never said one negative thing about my dog. She didn't even discuss it. Instead, she showed me the positive aspects of it.
And wasn't it someone else's dog?
Yeah. Mrs. Long had 3 of her own entries at that show that she could have used as an example, but she took her over to Mrs. Gray's bench of Wooley's Lane and took one of those bitches down to show them. And, you know, right there was a lesson to me to always be a good mentor and, you know, make opportunities for people to see things. And that's why it's important to go to dog. You know, you were saying before, you call people and what had the dog show go, and they said we went third in the class, but they don't know who won because they just get up and leave. And it used to be all the old shows. Ringside would be 5 and 6 deep with people watching.
Right, you couldn't get a seat at
Now
Connecticut
you go to
if
the
you were...
National, even when Judy was judging, you know, there was one whole side, there were all empty chairs. You know, they'd maybe come for Winter's Dog, but not like it used to be. Not like it used to be, and I think that changes a lot.
They're all in the grooming area,
Yep.
you know, at their setups and doing their PR.
Yeah. Do you think people just bring their best dogs to the National like they once did?
No, I think that sometimes they bring their whole kennel, and it seems like it, doesn't it?
Yeah. You know, more chances to win.
And I think the internet has just ruined actually everything, because people don't, I mean, you don't read articles or books anymore necessarily by people who are experts on the breed. Instead, you get commentary. If you're going to comment on something, everyone is at the same level. It levels the playing field. The people who are commenting, you have no idea, unless you know them personally, and you can't possibly, whether their opinion means something and they've been, you know, a student of the breed for 40 years, or whether they just got their first pet collie from Joe Blow. And, you know, and their opinion is as important as yours, or is as meaningful to them as yours is. Makes you, you know, it makes you not want to post. Or you see these pictures that come up on the internet of an ugly, wide-eyed expression, and 50 people click like on it. And you think, oh my God.
Do they not get it, or are they just being polite?
Yeah, exactly.
I think in a lot of cases, too, people rely on the internet for everything. I think it's great to have an internet. I think there's so much to be learned. But when we had to rely on books and we had to rely on experience, those were far better teachers. And all my old books, you know, when I started collecting antiques and antique dog books, mine were never worth anything because the ones I had were highlighted,
Dog-eared.
underlined, dog-eared, peanut butter and jelly on them. You know, and how often with a book or even a magazine will I pick something up and call and read it to you or someone else, but yet I never think about doing that on the internet. I just hit the send button. It's not the same. Because when we would call and read an article, we'd talk about it, we'd dissect it, and you learned. And, you know, somehow with an article would be the starting point. But then you would bring your own personal knowledge from somewhere else, and we'd learn a little bit about your experience or a little about my experience. I think it made a big difference. And I remember years ago, I went down to Glen Hill, And I think we got there at 1 o'clock in the morning because the car broke down.
Oh my God! And it was 2 o'clock, and
2
we were
o'clock.
breeding a bitch, and you knew Pat wouldn't mind.
And she came to the door in her nightgown and whatever, and I
And
said, I
she
bet you're
did mind.
surprised to see us. And she said, no, I figured you'd be here. But I remember taking Judy out to see the dogs, and at the time, Pat was in the middle of a divorce and all this other things. The dogs weren't in great condition, but we went out to look at Full Dress.
And he jumped up on the gate, and I'm going to tell you, all you could see, you know, it was kind of dark and dingy, and he wasn't well groomed, but this beautiful tricolor face with these gorgeous eyes, and this dog was just, you know, take your breath away. And he was old then.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it made me wish that I could go back 10 years and grab something from that. I never realized how beautiful that dog really was.
But there, you know, we had a lot of those moments with different dogs, and we would see them, and sometimes we'd have opinions about certain dogs that didn't have things that we liked. And yet, when we got to be friends with the people and looked at puppies and things like that, it all started to unfold, and you could look at them through their eyes and appreciate them differently, and that's important.
It definitely is.
You
we
know, that's
used
what
to go
makes
and
a
look at
breeder.
litters of puppies
Yeah,
all
some
the
look
time.
like Chihuahua mice, and they'd grow up to be important dogs because they were just
Or
pretty
not.
dogs. Or not. Or not.
Or not.
What do you feel overall? You just judged our national. What do you feel about the overall quality of our dogs?
I was not impressed. I mean, I found some dogs that I really liked, and I was really glad for that. But I would have had a hard time critiquing the first 2 placements in every one of my classes, you know, in any kind of great detail, which is probably why I just focused on the ones that I pulled out in the end. Not that I didn't find... I liked my winter's dog class. I really did. I thought they were, you know, without a doubt, the best that I could find in there. And I was very satisfied to see that. But I didn't find the quality running really deep. But I did see, of course, some beautiful specials that I didn't have a chance to get my hands on. And
it's always good, you know what, again, the optical illustration of those great ones provided that, you know, the new people can sift the wheat from the chaff and figure out who they are.
Well, there wasn't a dog that really took my breath away, you know, like you have those moments. I mean, I can remember seeing Breeze Along at the first national that I went to, and seeing Valley View Satin Slippers. You know, some of those dogs could just raise the hair on your arms that were just, you know, the last time that I saw a dog that really impressed me in that way was the dog that Naoma put up at the National in Springfield, who, when he walked in the ring, had so much presence and everything that when I took a look at him, the show was over for me.
Do you think there's a difference in judging a dog at a show, let's say looking for the best one on the day, versus judging a dog that you would want to breed to right away?
Probably, you know, because, you know, if you're looking for a breeding prospect, you're considering definitely all the fine details and the, you know, the qualities that you're looking for your bitch. You're not necessarily focusing on the grooming and the condition. You know, at a dog show, it's still a dog show. You know, the showmanship and the grooming all plays a part. But I guess that's what separates breeders from exhibitors, and, you know, it shouldn't separate breeders from judges, because I think that we always have to judge the dog on the basis of, you know, what it would bring to the table. You're judging breeding stock. That's the purpose.
I think if you're a breeder, you judge every single day when you go out in your yard. And I know in my own experience of judging in my yard, a different dog wins all the time. So that's just the way it is.
Well, I have my favorite pen, and the ones that are, you know, that tickle my fancy, that, you know, that bring a smile to my face, are always the ones that get the first pen. Not that I don't love the other ones and think that they're beautiful, but you know, you just always get this, what you call it, special feeling. I know it was Incognito's pen when, you know, when he was with me. It was Smoke and Mirror's pen. Now it's Chariot of Fire and my little Sable Merle bitch, Champion Clarion Through the Looking Glass, the mirror image daughter. And
The ones in the back are in solitary confinement.
yeah, that's or if
You know,
they're
there's
out of code. But no, it's just, you know, they make you smile when you walk up there.
How important do you think it is to have someone be a critic of your dogs or your breeding program or whatever?
It depends on who the person is. If it's somebody whose opinion I respect, who I think, you know, knows what they're looking at, doesn't have to be somebody that's an expert in dogs, but it has to be somebody
Do
who
they
I
have
think
to
has a
like
clue.
your dogs per se?
I think I would like it better if they didn't, and would, what you call it, and would look at them with a fresh eye.
I think that's how things have always, you know, people say, how have you two stayed friends for so long? You had different dogs and everything. We get excited for the great ones, and somehow there's some unwritten communication between the two of us. Maybe it's a look of an eye, a tilt of a head, which means don't make any comment on that one.
Right.
And we just know. We just know the ones you're not allowed to talk about.
That you're not allowed to talk about,
But
or
it doesn't
because we
matter
know that they're not
that-
as good as we might want them to be, but they're the ones we're working on at the time.
But
And-
you want, you know, I want her to like the ones that I think are really special, and I think that's vice versa.
You know what's funny is that we don't get jealous of each other. I don't think I never have, you know, I never have been jealous about your dogs unless it was one that you wouldn't let me have if I wanted it or something. But you know, it's like I can be happy for your wins, but I don't covet them, and you know, I appreciate them for what they are, and for what they are to you, and for what they are to the breed. But it doesn't have to be my look, and we've never infringed on each other's
Not really, no.
what you call it, looks, even though we did breed together twice.
What
And they're
faults-
still in our family.
They're still in
yeah,
our
they're
family.
still in our pedigrees.
What aesthetically, what faults would you deal with at this stage?
at
you
this
know,
stage?
which would be different than maybe 20 years ago. Aesthetically, what won't you deal with?
What won't I deal with? That's probably better. I can't abide wide eye placement. I hate that. It's, you know, you could find a lot of other things at my place, but you wouldn't find that. I hate depth of head. I like nothing better than a really beautiful long head with a barely perceptible stop, not a stair step, and no depth. These are the things that I want to see. I want to see a big neck. When I feel like it's slipping away from me, I get nervous because you try and do all these things to make sure that you know, it's like you get one part fixed and you get the fronts looking just the way you want and the rears fall off and that kind of thing, you know, but I still want that. I want the picture. These are, you know, I want the coat, but I never really dwell on it. I remember when I judged in Argentina, the first time I judged, there was, it was a nice specialty, and I had a beautiful coated dog in the ring with, you know, with tons of hair and a good attitude, and I had a little tiny bitch with a beautiful face and a really pretty head who moved well and stuff. She ended up being my best of breed, and people couldn't understand, or they, you know, they questioned the fact that I would put up something that didn't have coat, but your dogs are always have. I said, you know, she's not in a great coat. She's kind of out of coat right now, but she had all the details that make her a really great bitch. And the dog was a very pretty dog, but he wasn't as good in the things that mattered to me.
I had a friend who was very heavy set, and she always wore these big ponchos. And I said,
remember,
why do
yeah.
you always wear the ponchos? And she said, to cover up everything that's underneath them. And I thought, you know, you can have a lot of coat, but is it there to enhance or to cover up? And sometimes, you know, I do think you can have too much because our standard calls for a fitting coat. You know, sometimes it just hangs.
Well, sometimes we disagree on that issue because, you know, I love them pretty and fancy, and I love the coat, but it's
I
not.
think
It's
you want
not
it
the
to
thing,
fit that if they're outside, it doesn't require 2 cans of spray starch or whatever. It's what I
or
meant.
whatever. Exactly. You know, but it's not the what you call it, the most important characteristic of a collie to me. It just happens to be something that's in our family, and I'm glad of
That's
it.
a crowning glory.
Yeah, but it's not the be all and end all. There's nothing more important than the expression. I remember Marcia Keller saying that at a seminar that we were at.
She
She
said
just
what?
kept expression, expression, expression. What are the 3 most important things to you? Yes. I miss those kind of get-togethers, you know, the seminars that we used to have.
Maryland Seminar, Aconius,
Aconius.
Necesso. I mean, we had so many learning experiences, but don't you miss Collie Cues a little too?
You know, when I was down at a friend's house, she told me that she just won a package of 6 or 8 collie cues. She said, I don't know what to do with these. I said, give them to me. I want to read them again. I mean, I must have every issue in my attic
Now,
somewhere.
a lot of people don't even know what it was, but it was just a little inexpensive magazine, and every club, collie club in the country had a column. And somebody in the club would be their correspondent. You and I were both correspondents for northern New Jersey and greater New York. But
And then there were articles in there, and they were written by people that were
breeders.
And remember the articles by that fellow from Canada, that Hassel,
Yeah.
who, Allendale, his, you know, and I mean, his articles and his perspective always influenced me. I wanted to see his dogs, and I remember when I first started in collies, I went to Utah on that Utah circuit, and I saw an Allendale
Fulfillment.
dog.
Fulfillment, wasn't he out there? Allendale Fulfillment?
He wasn't, I didn't see him, but I
Okay.
did see an Allendale dog that had been sold there, and I saw him in the yard at this pet person's house, and he had this beautiful muzzle and a gorgeous head. And I thought, wow,
And
you know,
Carol
this
Phelps,
is what they
the
look like.
artist, had that Champion Allendale
Alacrity,
It was
yeah,
a
and he
handsome
was a
dog.
beautiful dog.
The interesting thing, going back to Cuso, is that we knew something about everybody because they would write little things. You know, we went to Kathy Peters' house and she made her world-famous lasagna with fruit salad. And I always wanted to go to Kathy Peters' house and have her world-famous lasagna with fruit, whatever. There was always some story about a person. And when I would travel, you know, I was lucky to have my free airfare thing as a kid. And I'd go to different parts of the country and I felt like I knew everybody. I kind of missed that too.
Well,
It
and
made
the
things more
camaraderie after the shows, remember at
We always had-
Knightswood, at
Yep.
Sue and Mike always had parties after the show.
And so many of the shows had dinners.
Yeah,
Long Island always had great fare and food. Health issues, you know, they're a problem of being a breeder, and we never get our choice of health issues. But like John Honig always used to say, if you haven't had it today, you'll probably get it tomorrow. And he was right.
he was right. Les
was right.
Canavan said the same thing. As soon as you say, I've never had that, you know, you're going to get it.
But what are the things that would frighten you the most as a breeder today? What do you really try and stay away from?
Bloat, you know, it's not been anything that I've had to personally deal with in our family, but I'm always reluctant to say that, you know, because
You'll
just
get it
because
tomorrow.
then I could get it tomorrow.
But why
It's
does that particularly scare you?
because the dogs die from it. And, you know, it's not just a health problem or something that you can control with medicine. I mean, the collie eye problem, you know, I think we've solved that pretty much.
Well, and you know when you sell a puppy that
what
it's
it
either
is,
got a good eye check
or bad, and if you're honest, you know that most of the time they're functional. It's something that you can't really control because none of us wanted to give up a beautiful face for a normal round light eye. And you know so we breed the best to the best and hope for the best.
That's about it. What suggestions would you give to someone that has gone through the pet stage, they bought a show dog, it didn't really turn out, but they really would like to put both feet in this and go? What are some suggestions you would make to them?
I usually tell people to get something like the Library of Champions books and go through and look at the pictures, you know, see if if certain lines. The dogs that they pick out as the ones that are the most attractive to them fall into certain families, and then try and find somebody to mentor them in that family of dogs, somebody whose dogs they admire. Basically, they need to look for a mentor.
What keeps you enrolled in this after all these years?
Sometimes I'm not sure. I guess I'm still looking for the perfect collie. The fear I have now is that if I finally ever do succeed in breeding the perfect collie, nobody will recognize it, and it will have all been a waste. But no, I can't quit. It's my life, and I get excited. I have a new litter now that I'm so excited over. That's out of my 8-year-old bitch, mirror image, who was by Smoke and Mirrors in the picture, and sired by Champion Clarion's Nightline. All these dogs have such big titles now, and grand champions. And Smoke and Mirrors was an international champion because he finished his title in South America after finishing in the States, and got an FCI championship. So, but none of that is as important as the dog itself. And I'm looking at my little puppies in the field and wondering if I have the next great one out there. So I suppose I'm just going to keep on doing that.
Well, years from now, if you and I are lucky enough to be drinking wine on the other side of the pearly gates, how would you like to be remembered?
I hadn't really thought about that because I'm trying not to think about leaving the world right now, but I would like to know that people respected what I did, and that there were some people out there who thought that I made a difference in the collie. I hope they remember me as a good person that was ethical and and honest, and that would be important. What about you?
Probably the same thing, that I was a teacher, and hopefully I think what I really want to be remembered at is somebody who was an inspiration, to let people think you can all do this if you stick with it, if you're dedicated and determined the same way we did.
A little crazy,
Yep.
and if you find a good friend.
Yep.
And
So I say we toast to 20 more years. And
20?
we can come back. Yeah, 20, we'll do the next interview.
we won't be 100 yet, will we?
No, and I'll be drooling. You'll have a bib on. Thanks, everybody, for being here, and thanks to Paul Beck and Kathy Peters for allowing me to do this great interview with my friend Judy. Hope we'll be able to do it in 20 years. That would be nice.
That would be nice. Thank you, John.
Thanks for being with us as we visited with John Buddy and Judy Evans. This has been a wonderful insight into a 50-plus year history of two determined and very accomplished professional collie breeders. We hope this time spent with them has been both informational and inspirational. Thanks for being with us for Reminiscing, the Clarion Chronicles with Judy Evans and John Buddy.